Here's a guy who thinks consciousness proves intelligent design.
What I would give to have learned all this sooner. There's actually a massive scientific mystery. Some scientists consider it the biggest scientific mystery, but they don't really teach people about it. Let's think about the question, what is it like to be John? This question is asking what the subjective experience of John is like. The mystery is, we actually don't know why subjective experience exists.
Yes, we do. We know what parts of the brain carry out conscious processes, and we know what those processes are. We know that if those processes are interfered with, subjective experience stops, and when they are restored, it resumes. We know that if you alter those processes, you can alter subjective experience, and we can predict exactly how it will be altered. The idea that we don't know why subjective experience happens is referred to by some philosophers as the hard problem of consciousness, and it was conclusively refuted by Daniel Dennett.
One time I had a very interesting discussion with Tom Nagel about this. Tom, who wrote What Is It Like to Be a Bat? And he said, well, neuroscience could give you perfect correlation between brain events and conscious events, but it wouldn't explain the correlation. And I said, okay, let's explore that. Can you give me an example where it's not just correlation? And he said, yes. Chemists, physicists can tell you, as it were, why water is wet. The molar macro property of wetness can be explained, not just correlated with, but explained in terms of the bonds of the water molecules and so forth. I said, okay, good. That's an example of explanatory correlation. I said, now, how about when industrial chemists create a new polymer that's never been seen on the globe before? It's an artificial polymer. And before they've even made it, they're telling you what its tensile strength is, what its color is, whether it's going to be brittle or stretchy, and so forth. I said, you know, they can do that sometimes. I said, would that be explanatory? And he said, yes. I said, okay, well, I think we've already entered the age of explanatory neuroscience. And I showed him the Ramachandran and Gregory motion capture experiment, where they predicted a brand new illusion that had never been seen anywhere before, and they predicted it on the basis of their knowledge of the organization of the visual cortex in terms of the blobs and the interblobs, and the parts that are motion sensitive and the parts that are have a low spatial resolution. And I said, isn't that exactly analogous to what the chemists do? Namely, these folks knew enough about how the brain worked so they could say, we'll prove that we know how the brain works because we will put together a circumstance which creates an illusion never before seen, and we'll predict it in advance. You know, so, I mean, that's why I think there's no hard problem.
We don't know how to create a machine with this phenomenon.
We've yet to build a model of the brain that works exactly as the brain does, but we've also yet to build a machine that carries out photosynthesis as effectively as chloroplasts do. That doesn't mean that we don't understand how photosynthesis occurs.
How do you make it like something to be a machine? Could AI have this phenomenon? What would it even be like to be an AI like ChatGPT?
I don't think ChatGPT has subjective experiences because it works by statistically relating words to other words, which is not what our brains do. Our brains relate words, or more specifically the concepts that those words represent, to sense data. I don't see any reason why a machine that did that wouldn't have subjective experiences. In fact, I don't even understand the difference between such a process and subjective experiences.
Why is subjective experience such a mystery? Well, you see, brains aren't magic. People tend to really mystify the brain, but it's more like a computer. While there are mysteries in physics, dark matter and whatnot, they don't really apply to things like the brain or computers. Your brain is basic matter and its basic forces. These are the only four forces in your brain. Computers and brains follow our known model of physics. A physicist isn't going to look inside a computer or a brain and be like, whoa, that wasn't supposed to happen. The brain is really just a big Rube Goldberg machine. And by that, I mean it's just a big physical chain reaction. Really, the whole world is one big chain reaction. For a quick neuroscience lesson, your brain is a network made of billions of neurons. They're connected via synapses. If a neuron has enough inward synapses firing, then all the outward synapses fire. Basically, your brain uses this algorithm to do all of its thinking. ChatGPT actually uses a similar algorithm.
No, it doesn't. Our brains are trained on continual experience interacting with our environment. ChatGPT is trained on words and the statistical relationships between them, not the interactions and sense data that those words represent. If an AI were put into a robot that wandered around its environment, interacting with it and learning how it works via those interactions, then it would be analogous to how our brains work. I imagine that this will be done eventually, and if it is, I see no reason why it wouldn't make sense to infer that such a robot has subjective experiences.
They're both called neural nets. Now let's say you build a big Rube Goldberg machine. Maybe you even model after the human brain. But regardless of how big or complicated you made it, you wouldn't really expect a Rube Goldberg machine to summon subjective experience.
It's not a matter of size and complexity. It's a matter of how it interacts with an environment. A machine that gathers data from its environment by interacting with that environment and creating models of that environment that produce predictions about how future experiences will unfold is something I would absolutely expect to have subjective experience.
Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. But the question, what is it like to be my Rube Goldberg machine, probably wouldn't cross your mind. You just wouldn't expect any machine to create that. But the Goldberg machine that is your brain, for some reason, does have subjective experience. And that's the big mystery. How? Why would physical parts moving around also create this?
Because this is also physical parts moving around. Subjective experience is a set of processes. It's perceiving, conceiving, feeling, thinking, etc. All of these things are events. What do you think is carrying out these events if not the brain?
Subjective experience, in some sense, just shouldn't exist. Because if every Goldberg machine was just its physical components and movement, then our understanding of the world would be more complete. I mean, isn't it crazy? Subjective experience, the phenomenon that in some sense gives the world meaning, is just one big question mark?
It would be if that were the case. It's not, though.
Anyways, that was a quick lesson for context. But none of that was my argument. I'm not going to say the intro proves or disproves anyone's worldview. But regardless of what people believe, there's two things that are universally agreed upon. Subjective experience exists.
No, it doesn't. Subjective experience is the set of events that I just described. It occurs rather than exists.
And subjective experience is a mystery. There's just a lot of questions around it.
I don't agree that it is a mystery. If it were universally agreed upon that subjective experience is a mystery, I would agree upon it. I don't.
Now for the actual argument. I love this argument because I really only need this from the intro. A universal fact.
Something has to be a fact before it can be a universal fact.
Now let's look at one of the biggest issues with subjective experience. I personally don't believe it does, but some people would say that ChatGPT probably has some low-level consciousness. And it's possible. It's possible that ChatGPT has subjective experience.
It would have to model its environment based on interactions with it in order to do that. That would require something analogous to a thalamocortical loop like the brain has, in order to take in sense data and build models on the basis of that data. As far as I know, ChatGPT doesn't work that way.
That it's like something to be ChatGPT. But here's the thing. ChatGPT wouldn't talk about it. Its neural net is not set up to say, a mysterious phenomenon emerges for me. Why does that happen? It's got these specific characteristics. But human neural nets are set up to speak about it.
I see absolutely no reason why an artificial intelligence wouldn't talk about its own cognitive experiences. If an AI modeled its own environment based on sense data gathered from interacting with that environment, at some point it would have to integrate its own existence and role in that environment as part of its models. It would even model its own model building process because that has consequences for behavior. That's exactly what subjective experience is. I see no reason why, when it did this, it wouldn't talk about it if it has the ability to talk.
I'm talking about it right now. In fact, we come with the absolute belief of subjective experience. Why are our neural nets specifically set up to speak about such a thing?
I don't think they are specifically set up to speak about such a thing. It seems to me like it would be a natural consequence of modeling the environment in the way I just described. I see no reason whatsoever to infer that this phenomenon would have to be pre-programmed.
The existence of subjective experience, and my body speaking about its existence, is clearly not a coincidence.
No, it's not a coincidence. It's a natural consequence of how our brains model our environments, and also ourselves because we play a role in our environments based on interactions with the objects that feed us sense data.
This means that there must be some level of causation tying the two together. But what could that causation possibly be?
The cognitive modeling process that I just described.
How could we go from ChatGPT having subjective experience to it being programmed to speak about it?
If it had it, it wouldn't need to be programmed to speak about it. It would be part of its model of the environment, and if it speaks about its model of the environment, it will speak about its subjective experience as well, because it will inevitably model that phenomenon. I still don't understand why you think an AI with subjective experiences wouldn't talk about those experiences. This is just a bare assertion you made with no argument backing it up at all.
You can think about it for now, but we'll get back to this question later. Instead, let's look closer at ChatGPT's hardware. ChatGPT is one of my favorite Goldberg machines. Once again, we don't know if it has subjective experience or not.
Yeah, we do. It doesn't.
But here's the thing. Subjective experience isn't in our model of physics.
Photosynthesis is also not in our model of physics. That doesn't mean that it is in any way inconsistent with our model of physics.
We can still figure out exactly how all of its hardware will move without knowing if it has subjective experience or not.
Not true. We know exactly what is necessary for cognitive experience, and if an AI were given those mechanisms, we would know that it has those experiences.
In fact, we can figure out exactly how any structure will move without knowing if it has subjective experience.
Also not true.
This is only possible if subjective experience doesn't have physical impact.
It's not the case that we can't discern whether a mechanism is conscious or not, but even if we didn't know how to determine this, it wouldn't follow that consciousness must therefore have no impact on physical systems. I have no idea why you think this follows logically. There may be phenomena that we can never understand. It doesn't follow from this that such phenomena have no physical consequences.
Now, don't get me wrong. The physical parts that one might say causes subjective experience are very important physics-wise, but the phenomenon itself isn't. I mean, take the statement in. Read it as many times as you need.
How many times do I have to read it before I see it as anything other than a complete non sequitur?
Now, the logic from here is pretty simple. If subjective experience has no physical impact, then how are we talking about it? What could be the link from it existing to us talking about it? Well, you would need some form of intelligent design. Because natural causes, things like natural selection and evolution, they can't care about something if it doesn't have physical impact. They're blind to such phenomena. They can't be the causation linking the two.
To say that consciousness cannot have physical consequences is to say that there cannot be any link whatsoever. If there is a link, then that would only mean that any causation between subjective experience and physical phenomena is indirect. It wouldn't mean that no causation is happening. And wouldn't an intelligent designer also be a subjective experience? If it is, and subjective experience can't have physical consequences, then how could it program our brains at all? If subjective experience is a non-physical phenomenon and therefore cannot have physical consequences, then how can the non-physical intelligent designer have physical consequences? Why does one non-physical entity have physical consequences but not the other? To everyone who helps me out on Patreon, you're a big help. Thanks so much.